The air inside the Gilded Fork, an upscale restaurant perched atop a sleek Manhattan high-rise, hummed with the clinking of crystal glasses and the murmur of the city's elite, politicians, CEOs, and socialites sipping overpriced wine under the glow of chandeliers. It was a Thursday evening, the kind where the skyline glittered like a promise through floor-to-ceiling windows. When the sharp crack of a slap shattered the refined ambiance, Officer Derek Holt, a wiry 28-year-old beat cop with a buzz cut and a badge pinned crookedly to his off-duty jacket, stood over a table in the corner, his palm still stinging from the blow he'd just delivered. His target was Lena Jackson, a 42-year-old black woman with a poised frame and eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian. Her fork paused midair over a plate of truffle risotto. The room froze, waiters mid-step, a champagne flute teetering on a tray, the violinist's bow screeching to a halt, as Derek's voice boomed, thick with venom. "You don't talk to me like that. You hear me? I don't care who you think you are." His face, flushed crimson beneath a sheen of sweat, twisted with the kind of rage that festered from years of entitlement. A belief that his badge gave him dominion over anyone who dared defy him. Lena staggered back in her chair, the sting blooming across her cheek like wildfire. But her gaze didn't waver, not for a second. She dabbed her lips with a napkin, slow and deliberate, as if the slap were a mere inconvenience. Her silence louder than the gasps rippling through the stunned crowd. Diners fumbled for their phones, cameras flashing like lightning in a storm, capturing the spectacle. A white cop, unhinged, towering over a black woman who refused to shrink. Derek, oblivious to the growing audience, lunged forward, seizing her wrist with a snarl, his fingers digging into her skin as he yanked her arm toward the table's edge. "You're coming with me." Disorderly conduct. Resisting an officer, he barked, fumbling for the cuffs dangling from his belt, the metal glinting under the chandelier's light. The restaurant's maitre d', a wiry man in a tuxedo, darted forward, pleading, "Sir, please, this is a private establishment," but Derek shoved him aside, sending a tray of oysters crashing to the marble floor, pearls of brine splattering like blood. Lena inhaled deeply, her chest rising as she locked eyes with him, unblinking, a predator sizing up prey. Then, a flicker of something dangerous curled her lips, a smile, sharp and knowing, as if she held a secret that could unravel his world. "You just torched your entire life, Officer Holt," she said, her voice low, steady, slicing through the chaos like a blade. He scoffed, shoving her toward the exit, the cuffs snapping shut around her wrists with a metallic click that echoed through the room. "Yeah, right, keep talking, lady. I'm the law here," he growled, his bravado masking the tremor in his hands. What Derek didn't know, what he couldn't fathom as he dragged her past the gaping diners and out into the neon-drenched night, was that Lena Jackson wasn't just some random woman he decided to intimidate over a perceived slight. She wasn't a loudmouth customer or a nobody he could bully into submission. She was Judge Lenora Jackson, a 42-year-old titan of the New York judicial system. A federal magistrate who'd spent 2 decades dismantling corruption from courtroom benches. A woman whose name struck fear into the hearts of dirty cops and crooked lawyers alike. That slap wasn't just an assault, it was a detonation. A spark igniting a firestorm that would engulf Derek, his precinct, and the fragile facade of power he clung to. The phones kept rolling, the footage already uploading to a dozen platforms. Hashtags like #Justice for Lena and #CopGoneRogue flickering to life as the video spread like gasoline on a dry field. Outside, the icy February wind whipped through the streets, sirens wailing in the distance as backup raced toward the restaurant. But Lena remained a statue in the chaos, her cuffed hands steady, her mind already 3 steps ahead. She'd seen this script before, decades ago, as a wide-eyed 12-year-old in Harlem, watching her uncle hauled off by cops for daring to question a broken taillight stop. His pleas drowned out by batons and barked orders. That memory had forged her, hammered her into a force of nature who'd vowed to rewrite the rules of a game rigged against her kind. Now, as Derek shoved her toward his unmarked cruiser, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey and desperation, she let the past fuel her present. He thought he'd won, thought he'd asserted control, but he'd just stepped into a trap of his own making. The restaurant doors burst open behind them, a swarm of onlookers spilling out. their voices rising in outrage. "Let her go. We've got it all on tape," as the city's pulse quickened. Derek's radio crackled, a voice cutting through the static. "Holt. Stand down. Do you even know who she is?" His smirk faltered, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple trots. But he doubled down, slamming Lena against the car door. "She's nothing," he spat, though his eyes darted nervously to the growing crowd. Lena tilted her head, her voice a whisper meant only for him. "You're about to find out what nothing feels like, officer." In that moment, the ground beneath Derek Holt began to crack, though he wouldn't feel the full collapse until the world saw the truth. He'd just struck the one woman with the power to bury him, and she wasn't about to let this slide. The Gilded Fork, once a sanctuary for the privileged, had become the stage for a reckoning, and as the sirens closed in, the city held its breath for the explosion to come. The cruiser's tires squealed as Derek Holt peeled away from the Gilded Fork, the neon glow of Manhattan's skyline blurring into streaks of light through the rain-slicked windows. Inside, Judge Lenora Jackson, Lena to those who knew her beyond the bench, sat in the backseat. Her wrists chafed raw by the handcuffs Derek had cinched far too tight. A petty act of spite that made her flex her fingers to keep the blood flowing. The air reeked of stale cigarette smoke and Derek's cheap cologne, a nauseating cocktail that clung to her throat as he ranted, his voice a jagged-edged blade slicing through the silence. "You think you're some big shot, huh? Jogging your mouth like that in front of everyone, embarrassing me? I ought to drag you through every precinct in this city. Let 'em all see what happens when you disrespect a cop." His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, wild and bloodshot, catching hers for a split second before he slammed the dashboard with his fist, sending a half-empty coffee cup tumbling to the floor. Lena's jaw tightened, but her face remained a mask of stone, calm, unyielding, a fortress he couldn't breach. Inside, though, a storm churned. Frustration at being cuffed like a common criminal. Fury at the audacity of this small-minded thug. And a flicker of exhaustion from a lifetime of navigating a world that saw her skin before her strength. She'd clawed her way from Harlem's cracked sidewalks to the federal bench, enduring sneers, threats, and the constant weight of proving herself twice as hard as anyone else, yet here she was. Again, reduced to a target by a man too blind to see the cliff he was sprinting toward. Her mind flashed to that 12-year-old girl watching her uncle's arrest. The helplessness that had hardened into resolve, she wouldn't let Derek strip that from her now. She exhaled slowly, her voice cutting through his tirade like a whip. "You're digging your own grave. Holt, keep talking, it's all on record." He laughed, a harsh, barking sound, and cranked the radio to a blaring static hiss, drowning her out as if noise could erase her power. Derek's outrage only grew as he swerved through traffic, his actions spiraling into the absurd. He yanked the wheel hard, cutting off a taxi, then rolled down his window to scream obscenities at the driver, spittle flying into the night. "Move, you idiot, I've got a perp here," he bellowed, as if Lena were a bank robber and not a woman he'd assaulted over a sarcastic remark about his manners at the restaurant. Then, in a move that would have been comical if it weren't so infuriating, he pulled into a gas station, not to refuel, but to grab a pack of chewing gum from the counter, leaving Lena locked in the car with the engine running. The heat cranked to a suffocating 85 degrees. He strutted back, popping a piece into his mouth with a smug grin, and tossed the wrapper at her through the partition, where it landed mockingly on her lap. "Gotta keep fresh for the boys at the station," he sneered, smacking the gum loudly as he peeled out again. The sheer pettiness of it, the gum, the heat, the wrapper, gnawed at Lena's patience. Each act a deliberate taunt from a man who thought he could break her spirit with childish cruelty. She stared at the wrapper, her mind wrestling with the urge to snap back, to let the anger spill out. But she swallowed it down. She'd learned long ago that rage was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when survival meant outsmarting men like him. Her authority wasn't in shouting, it was in the gavel she'd wield when this was over. The law she'd bend to crush him. Still, the heat pressed against her temples, and the memory of her uncle's bruised face flickered. She wouldn't let Derek see her crack. But God, how she wanted to. Derek Holt's past had primed him for this moment. A cocktail of entitlement and resentment brewed over 28 years. Growing up in a crumbling Queens row house, he'd idolized his older brother, Tommy, a cop who'd swaggered home with tales of keeping the streets clean, a euphemism for roughing up anyone who didn't fit the neighborhood's pale. Orderly Mold, their father, a washed-up boxer turned security guard, had pounded one lesson into Derek's skull. You don't let them talk back, ever. Them was never defined, but Derek knew, black folks, Latinos, anyone who dared question the Holt family's fragile grip on authority. By 19, he joined the force, not out of duty but spite, eager to wield the badge Tommy had lost to a drunk driving crash. On the job, Derek thrived on petty power trips, ticketing kids for loitering, accidentally elbowing suspects during pat-downs, each act a brick in the wall of his ego. Tonight, though, he'd gone further. The slap at the gilded fork wasn't just impulse, it was payback for Lena's calm defiance. For the way she'd looked through him when he demanded she show some respect after he'd spilled her wine reaching for his buzzing phone. Now, as he sped toward the precinct, he wasn't just arresting her, he was staging a one-man circus of vengeance. He pulled out his phone, one hand on the wheel, and started filming her through the partition. The lens wobbling as he cackled. Say hi to the internet, princess. Let's see how tough you are when this goes live. The audacity was maddening. He wasn't just breaking protocol, he was turning her humiliation into a trophy. Streaming it to his buddies or whatever cesspool of followers he had online. Lena's inner struggle deepened as the phone's red light blinked. Her reflection caught in its glare. She wanted to lunge, to smash the device against the seat, to scream that she was Judge Lenora Jackson, a name that made prosecutors tremble, but she stayed still, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Every fiber of her ached to fight back, to reclaim the dignity he was trying to strip away. But she knew the game. One wrong move, one crack in her composure, and he'd twist it into proof she was the aggressor. Her mind raced. The restaurant footage was already out there. Her team would be mobilizing. The law was her weapon, but the weight was torture. She thought of her son, 14 and oblivious at home, and the threats she'd faced over years of exposing corrupt cops. Would this embolden them? Derek's voice yanked her back. Smile. Sweetheart, this is your big moment. He posted the video with a tap, chuckling as he veered onto a side street, bypassing the precinct entirely. Think he'll take the scenic route. Give the boys time to see this, he said, grinning like a kid who'd won a dare. Lena's eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed steady. You're a fool, Holt. That video's your news. He laughed again, oblivious. But the precinct loomed closer despite his detour, and with it, the shock of her identity. A revelation that would turn his circus into a cage. Lena's calm wasn't just resilience, it was a promise she'd bury him. And she'd do it her way. The precinct loomed ahead, a squat brick fortress bathed in the sickly yellow glow of sodium lights. Its shadow stretching across the rain-soaked street like a predator waiting to swallow them whole. Inside the cruiser, Derek Holt's knuckles widened on the steering wheel as he muttered under his breath. A venomous stream of slurs and half-formed threats spilling out like bile. You people always think you can talk your way out of anything. Don't you? He sneered, his voice dripping with the casual cruelty of a man who'd never questioned the world he'd been handed. Judge Lenora Jackson sat in the backseat, her wrists bruised beneath the cuffs, her tailored blazer stained with coffee from his earlier tantrum. But her eyes burned with a quiet fury that could have melted steel. The words, "You people," hit her like a punch to the gut. Echoing a lifetime of indignities. The teacher who'd assumed she'd cheated to ace a test at 15. The law school dean who'd smirked and said she'd fill a quota. The countless traffic stops where badges like Derek's turned routine into humiliation. Each memory was a scar, etched deep by a system that didn't just tolerate racism but cradled it. A rotting foundation built on decades of silence and complicity. As the car lurched to a stop in the precinct lot, Derek twisted around, his face a mask of smug triumph. Welcome to reality, princess, your little show's over, he said, yanking the door open and hauling her out with a roughness that sent her stumbling onto the asphalt. Her knee scraped the ground, blood seeping through her slacks. But she rose without a flinch, her silhouette framed against the precinct's flickering sign. A symbol of justice that had betrayed her kind for generations. Inside, the air thickened with the stench of sweat and stale donuts. The walls plastered with faded, "Protect and Serve" posters curling at the edges. Mocking the truth she'd lived, This wasn't protection. It was predation. Derek's upbringing had been a masterclass in blind loyalty to that warped system. Raised in a Queens tenement where the American flag hung like a shield over every doorway. He'd grown up on his father's rants, bitter tirades about how they were taking over. How the city was softer now because cops couldn't do their jobs anymore. His brother Tommy, a decorated officer until booze and a wrecked cruiser ended his career, had been Derek's hero, regaling him with stories of busting heads in Brownsville. Each tale a lesson in power over mercy. "You don't let him get comfortable, kid," Tommy would say, slugging a beer as Derek, barely 10, nodded wide-eyed. That gospel stuck, hardening into a creed when Derek pinned on his own badge at 19. A scrawny rookie eager to prove he could outmuscle his brother's legacy. He'd thrived in a precinct where, as versus them, wasn't just whispered, it was policy. Complaints about his rough arrests, black teens shoved against walls, Latino bodega owners taught a lesson, vanished into a black hole of paperwork. Buried by sergeants who'd clap him on the back and mutter, "Good work, Holt," tonight, dragging Lena through the precinct doors. He was the system incarnate. A cog in a machine that didn't just shield its own but rewarded their worst impulses. He shoved her toward the booking desk, barking at the desk officer, a grizzled vet with a buzz cut, to process this one quick. Then leaned in with a grin, whispering loud enough for her to hear, "Let's see how tough she is when she's got a record." The officer hesitated, eyes darting to Lena's unbowed stance, but said nothing, silence as old as the precinct itself. Lena's chest tightened as she stood there, the weight of history pressing down like a physical force. She saw her uncle's face again, his split lip, his eyes pleading as cops dragged him away for obstruction, all those years ago in Harlem. A scene replayed in her mind every time she'd ruled on a brutality case from the bench. She'd spent 20 years dismantling corruption, exposing cops who planted evidence, prosecutors who traded plea deals for kickbacks, a judicial system that winked at black bodies piling up in cells. Yet here she was, cuffed and bleeding, a living testament to how little had changed. The precinct buzzed around her, officers glancing her way, then away, their averted gazes a chorus of cowardice. She wanted to scream, to shatter the glass case holding a dusty Officer of the Year plaque from 1983. To force them to see the rot they'd nurtured. But she held it in, her breath steady, her mind a steel trap. She knew the restaurant footage was spreading, phones lighting up across the city. Hashtags like #justice for Lena trending as strangers wept and raged for her. That power, the people's voice, was her lifeline now, but it didn't erase the ache. How many others had stood here? Invisible, their cries swallowed by these walls? Her son's face flashed before her, 14. Brown-skinned, a target waiting to happen, and the stakes sharpened. She wouldn't just survive this, she'd burn it down for him. For all of them. Derek's glee unraveled as the precinct doors swung open. A gust of cold air ushering in chaos. A captain stormed in, her face a thundercloud, tablet in hand blaring the viral video, Derek's slap, Lena's fall, the crowd's gasps echoing in tinny surround sound. "Holt, what the hell have you done?" she roared, her voice cutting through the room like a guillotine. Officers froze, their chatter dying as the screen replayed Derek's hand striking Lena's cheek. A moment now seared into the city's consciousness. He stammered. She resisted. "Cap, I was." But the lie crumbled under the weight of a dozen stares. Some horrified, some resigned, all knowing the truth. Lena straightened, her voice low but resonant. "You don't even know who I am. Do you?" The captain's eyes widened, recognition dawning as she barked. "Uncuff her, now." Derek's swagger evaporated, his hands fumbling as the cuffs clattered to the floor, revealing the red welts on Lena's wrists, a silent indictment of a system that had let him run wild. "Judge Lenora Jackson," the captain said, the name a seismic shock that rippled through the room. "Federal magistrate, 2nd District." Derek's knees buckled, his breath hitching as the reality sank in. He hadn't just assaulted a woman, he'd struck a pillar of justice. A black woman who'd spent decades fighting the very corruption he embodied. The precinct fell silent, a tomb for his career. But Lena's gaze swept past him to the officers. The walls, the legacy of bias they'd all upheld. "This isn't just about him," she said, Her voice a clarion call. It's about all of you, and it ends now. The fight's not over. Systemic racism and corruption thrive in shadows like these. But we can light them up together. Leave a comment below. Share your story. Your anger. Your hope. Join us to demand justice. To dismantle this machine one voice at a time. Don't let Lena stand alone. The precinct's fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of angry wasps as Judge Lenora Jackson stood uncuffed. Her wrists still bearing the angry red welts from Derek Holt's handcuffs. A raw testament to the night's brutality. The air thickened with tension as Captain Marcia Reyes clutched her tablet. The screen replaying the damning footage from the Gilded Fork in a relentless loop. Derek's hand cracking across Lena's cheek. The sharp gasp of the crowd. The glint of cuffs snapping shut as he dragged her out, all caught and crisp. Unforgiving high definition by a dozen smartphones. But it didn't stop there. A rookie officer, pale and trembling, stepped forward with a shaky voice. "Ma'am, there's more." He posted this. He handed over Derek's phone. Unlocked in the chaos, revealing a shaky livestream from the cruiser, Derek's taunting grin as he zoomed in on Lena's stoic face. His voice slurring. "Say hi to the internet, princess." The video, timestamped just 20 minutes ago, had already racked up thousands of views. Comments flooding in like a tidal wave. "Disgusting pig. This is why we can't trust cops. She's somebody, do something." Derek's bravado curdled into panic, his jaw dropping as he stammered. I didn't mean, it was just a joke." But the evidence piled higher. The gas station clerk's security footage, emailed to the precinct by a furious bystander, showed him tossing the gum wrapper at Lena, smirking as he left her sweltering in the locked car. Each frame was a nail in his coffin. A portrait of a man drunk on power, oblivious to the humanity he'd trampled. Lena watched silently, her chest tight with a cocktail of rage and sorrow, not just for herself, but for every soul this system had chewed up and spat out. She'd seen it before, her uncle's broken spirit, her neighbor's son lost to a routine stop. Countless cases where evidence vanished and justice dissolved into shrugs. This time, though, the world was watching. Outside, Manhattan erupted. The video from the Gilded Fork had ignited a firestorm, spreading across social media like wildfire. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, each platform a megaphone for a city's pent-up fury. By midnight, #Justice for Lena trended globally. The hashtag a rallying cry stitched into posts of tear-streaked faces and clenched fists. On the steps of City Hall, a crowd swelled, hundreds, then thousands, bundled in coats against the February chill, their breath fogging the air as they chanted, "No more, no more." Placards bobbed above their heads. "End police brutality. Justice isn't blind, it's biased. Lena deserves better." A young woman, barely 20, stood on a milk crate, megaphone trembling in her hands as she sobbed. "My brother's gone. Shot for a busted taillight. And this cop gets to slap a judge? How many more?" Her voice broke, but the crowd roared back. A primal scream of grief and defiance that rattled the precinct's windows a mile away. Newsvans lined the streets, anchors stumbling over updates. Shocking footage. Officer Derek Holt under investigation. Judge Lenora Jackson, a federal magistrate, assaulted. The public's outrage wasn't just noise, it was a reckoning. A mirror held up to a system that had shielded men like Derek for too long. Inside, Lena caught snippets of it on an officer's phone, the chants filtering through the walls. And her throat tightened. This wasn't about her alone, it was about the unseen, the unheard, the ones who'd never gotten this far. The evidence against Derek sharpened into a blade of irrefutable truth. The restaurant's security cameras had captured every angle. His swagger as he'd stormed her table. The wine glass he'd knocked over in a fit of pique. The slap that landed with a sound like a gunshot. Witnesses poured in statements. Diners who'd overheard him mutter, "uppity," under his breath. The maitre d', who'd begged him to stop. Even a dishwasher who'd filmed him shoving Lena into the cruiser. His laughter echoing off the high-rise facade. Then came the precinct's own logs, reluctantly handed over by a sweating desk sergeant. 5 prior complaints against Derek, excessive force, racial slurs, all investigated and dismissed with a wink and a nod. The captain's face hardened as she scrolled through the files, her voice a low growl. "You've been a walking time bomb." Holt, and we let you tick. Derek slumped against the wall, his bravado shattered, muttering, "It's not fair. I was just doing my job." But the lie rang hollow, drowned by the weight of his own actions. Lena's eyes met his, not with triumph but with a weary clarity. She saw a man molded by a system that prized control over compassion. A system that had failed him as much as it had failed her. Yet the failure wasn't hers to bear. She thought of her son, safe at home but never truly safe. And the lesson burned clear. Accountability wasn't just punishment, it was a lifeline. A chance to break the cycle before it claimed another generation. The public's rage crested into something sacred. A collective awakening that pulsed with humanistic meaning. In Harlem, a grandmother lit a candle at a vigil, whispering prayers for Lena and every name etched in her memory: Trayvon, Breonna, George, her wrinkled hands trembling as she told a reporter, "I marched in '63. And I'm still marching. When's it enough?" In Brooklyn, a teenage poet scrawled verses on a protest sign: "They cuff our wrists, but not our will. Rise, rise, till justice spills." Across the river, a white cop, graying at the temples, broke ranks on live TV, his voice cracking. "I've seen it, good officers silenced, bad ones promoted. I'm done staying quiet." Their stories wove a tapestry of pain and hope. A lesson in resilience for anyone listening. That humanity thrives when we refuse to let injustice fester. When we demand better not just for ourselves but for the stranger beside us. Lena felt it all, their voices, their tears, seeping into her bones as she stepped out of the precinct into a sea of flashing cameras. The crowd surged forward, shouting her name, but she raised a hand, her voice steady yet thick with emotion. "This isn't my victory, it's ours. Every one of you who's fought, who's lost, who's still here, you're why this matters." Tears pricked her eyes, not from weakness but from the weight of connection. The realization that her pain had cracked open a door for healing. Derek's fate was sealed, suspended, soon to face trial. But the real fight loomed larger, a system begging to be rebuilt. The story's not over, it's yours too. This isn't just about Lena or Derek, it's about us. About the lessons we carry forward. That silence breeds rot. That courage can reshape the world. That justice demands we see each other's humanity. Drop a comment below, share your outrage, your dreams, your resolve. Join this fight against racism, against corruption, one voice at a time. Together, we can turn reckoning into redemption. The rain hammered relentlessly against the cracked window of Derek Holt's one-room apartment. A dingy box tucked above a bodega in the shadow of Queens' rusted overpasses. Far from the precinct lights that once defined his world. Inside, the air hung heavy with the sour reek of spilled whiskey and unwashed clothes. The only sounds the drip of a leaking faucet and the faint buzz of a TV flickering with static. Derek slumped in a threadbare armchair, its springs groaning under his weight. His once crisp uniform replaced by a stained t-shirt clinging to his hunched frame. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the Gilded Fork. Since the viral video of him slapping Judge Lenora Jackson had torched his career. And now the ashes of his life lay scattered across the room. A crumpled suspension notice pinned under an empty bottle. His badge and gun confiscated in a humiliating precinct stripped down. Headlines screaming, "Disgraced cop sinks lower," on a pile of newspapers he couldn't bear to throw out. The walls, peeling with yellowed paint, seemed to close in, each crack a taunt from a world that had turned its back. His phone, once alive with texts from buddies bragging about busts, now sat silent on the warped coffee table. No calls, no messages, just a graveyard of missed opportunities. He reached for the whiskey, his hand trembling as he poured the last dregs into a chipped mug. The burn down his throat a fleeting escape from the truth. He'd lost everything, his job, his pride, his place, and the isolation was a slow chokehold tightening with every breath. Derek's downfall had been swift and merciless. A public execution played out in headlines and hashtags. The precinct had cut him loose the moment Captain Reyes saw the evidence pile up: videos, witness statements, his own damning livestream, suspending him without pay pending a full investigation that promised felony charges. The badge he'd worn like a crown was pried from his chest by a stony-faced sergeant. The metal leaving an empty ache where his identity once hung, his service weapon. A Glock he'd polished religiously. was logged into evidence as if it were a crime scene relic. The media feasted on him like vultures. Officer Holt, from lawman to pariah. Racist cops fall shocks city. Each story peeling back his life, his 5 buried complaints. His brother Tommy's DUI disgrace, until he was a caricature of failure splashed across every screen. Outside his apartment, the bodega owner who'd once nodded hello now spat on the sidewalk as Derek shuffled by. Kids scrawling, "Pig," in marker on his rusted mailbox. His old crew, guys he'd shared beers with after shifts, ghosted him. Their last text to Kurt, "You're toxic. Man," from Joey, his partner of 2 years. Even his family severed ties, his father. The ex-boxer who drilled, "Cops don't back down," into him. Hung up mid-sentence when Derek called. The dial tone a guillotine, his mother's voicemail looped endlessly. Leave a message, but she never answered. He was a leper in a city that had once cheered his swagger. And the solitude gnawed at him like a living thing, whispering that he'd brought this on himself. The desperation crept in slow, then roared. At first, Derek tried to fight it, pounding on the bodega counter for credit when his last 20 ran dry. Only to be shoved out with a snarled, "Get lost." Holt. He'd paced the apartment, replaying that night. Lena's calm defiance. The slap he couldn't take back. The crowd's phones sealing his fate. "She provoked me," he muttered, his voice hoarse as he kicked over a stack of takeout containers. Greasy wrappers skittering across the floor. But the lie crumbled under the weight of memory, her steady gaze. His unraveling temper, and the truth festered. He'd lashed out because she dared to be more than he could handle. A black woman who'd outshone him without trying. He stumbled to the window, peering through the rain at a world moving on without him, and saw a flyer taped to a lamppost. "Justice for Lena, rally tonight." The sight twisted the knife, her name everywhere. His erased. He grabbed his laptop, a relic from better days, and scrolled through the hate. Tweets calling him scum. A viral meme of his slap set to a laugh track. Emails from strangers promising he'd rot in hell. One message, anonymous and curt, "You're done. Holt, watch your back," sent a shiver down his spine. And he slammed the screen shut, the glow reflecting his hollowed eyes. Bloodshot and sunken from sleepless nights. He'd lost 15 pounds, his frame shrinking as if the world's scorn were eating him alive. And the mirror showed a stranger, unshaven, haunted, a man who'd traded his soul for a badge and found it worthless. The isolation birthed a reckless edge, a desperation that clawed at his sanity. He rummaged through a drawer, pulling out a faded photo of him and Tommy, grinning in their uniforms, a reminder of the legacy he'd chased and ruined. "You get it, bro," he rasped, tracing Tommy's face with a trembling finger, tears pricking his eyes for the first time since childhood. But Tommy was gone, and Derek was alone, the weight of his choices a noose he couldn't shake. He staggered to the TV, flipping channels. Everyone blared Lena's story, her press conference, her poise, the protest swelling in her name. "She took everything," he shouted, hurling the mug at the screen, glass shattering as the news anchor's voice droned on about systemic reform. The room spun, whiskey and rage blurring into a plan, wild, unformed, but insistent. He grabbed a kitchen knife, its dull blade glinting in the dim light, and clutched it like a lifeline. "If I'm done, she's done," he growled, the words a vow to drag her down with him. A last gasp of control in a life stripped bare. He stumbled to the door, rain lashing his face as he stepped into the night, the knife tucked into his waistband, his shadow a jagged smear against the wet pavement. The city pulsed beyond, alive with Lena's fight, but Derek's world had shrunk to this: one man, one blade, one target. His desperation a ticking bomb ready to explode. Derek Holt was a ghost of himself, a cautionary tale carved in real time. He'd lost more than a job, he'd lost his tether to meaning, to community, to the lie that power could shield him from consequence. The life he'd known had unraveled thread by thread, leaving him naked in the wreckage, a villain not just to the public but to the mirror he couldn't face. His story wasn't over, but it was a descent, a man who'd gambled on hate and found it a hollow bet. Now teetering on the edge of oblivion, driven by a desperation that could only end in ruin. 3 weeks had passed since the night at the Gilded Fork. Since Derek Holt's slap had ignited a firestorm that consumed his life and thrust Judge Lenora Jackson into the heart of a city's reckoning. Now, in the quiet of her brownstone study, the glow of a desk lamp cast soft shadows across her face as she sat, a legal brief untouched before her, her wrists still faintly marked by faded bruises from that night's cuffs. Outside, Manhattan hummed with the distant echoes of protests, her name chanted in the streets. A symbol of resistance, but here, alone with the ticking of a wall clock, Lena's mind drifted, tugging her back to a past that whispered through the cracks of her resolve. The viral video had unraveled Derek's world, his badge stripped and his name vilified. But for Lena, it was more than a victory, it was a mirror, reflecting the wounds that had shaped her, the journey that had forged her, and the kindness she refused to let die. She closed her eyes, and the room dissolved into memory, a Harlem stoop. Summer 1992, the air sticky with heat and the faint drone of cicadas. She was 12, barefoot and wide-eyed, clutching a melting popsicle as her father, Marcus Jackson, stood on their porch, his work shirt damp with sweat from the docks. He'd been laughing moments before, teasing her about her sticky fingers, when shouts erupted down the block, "Mr. Tate, the barber," pinned against his shop by two cops, his broom clattering to the ground. Marcus stepped forward, hands raised, voice calm but firm. "He's 70. Officers, what's he done?" The answer came swift, a baton to his gut. Then his knee, a sickening crunch as he fell, blood pooling on the concrete. Lena's scream caught in her throat, her popsicle slipping to the stoop as she ran, only to be yanked back by her mother's trembling arms. Marcus's eyes found hers through the chaos, deep, glistening, a mystery of pain and pride she'd carry like a stone. That day was a fracture, splitting her world into before and after, a wound that pulsed with every beat of her heart. Marcus came home 6 months later, a shadow of himself. Rikers had hollowed him out, his frame gaunt from obstruction charges that stuck like tar, his laughter replaced by a cough that worsened until cancer stole him at 42. Lena, 14 and fierce, sat by his hospital bed, his hand frail in hers as he rasped, "You're stronger than this, Lena girl, don't let it break you." His words were a seed, planting a quiet vow, she'd fight, not with fists but with the law, unraveling the corruption that crushed men like him. She'd scavenged law books from thrift shops, her mother's diner tips stretched thin to keep the lights on as Lena studied by candlelight. Her innocence a flicker she guarded through sleepless nights. At 22, Columbia law loomed, an outsider in a sea of privilege. Her kindness a lifeline she tossed to classmates who'd never know her grief, a shared coffee with a struggling peer, a gentle word to a janitor. By 30, she was a federal magistrate, her chambers a sanctuary where she ruled with mercy, sparing a teen caught in a raid. Listening to a mother's plea, her gavel a quiet rebellion against a system that had orphaned her. 3 weeks ago, Derek's slap had ripped that old scar wide, his cuffs a cold echo of her father's. But Lena's spirit didn't buckle. She traced the faint bruises now, her fingers steady, and felt Marcus's warmth, a reminder that her fight was bigger than one night, bigger than one man. The past unfurled like a tattered scroll, each memory a brushstroke of loss and love. She saw Marcus tossing her a baseball in their cramped yard, his grin brighter than the sun. The day before he'd confronted those cops, a fleeting joy no jail could erase. She heard her mother's voice, cracked from late shifts, humming Amazing Grace over a sink full of dishes, her faith a buoy that kept Lena afloat. There was Jamal, the boy next door, 16 and dreaming, equals of college, shot dead by a cop who claimed he reached. Lena had knelt at his grave, her hands muddy as she planted flowers, whispering, "I'll make it right." These ghosts crowded her study now, their shadows dancing in the lamplight. But they didn't sour her. They fueled a kindness no brutality could bury, a belief that even in a world that crushed, she could lift others up. Derek's rage had tried to snuff it, his sneer a mirror of those officers on her stoop. But Lena refused to let it taint her. She thought of her son, Miles, asleep upstairs, his sketchbook open to a drawing of her in a cape, a hero he'd never see falter. 3 weeks on, the city rallied for her, protest swelling. Derek's life in ruins, but here, in this stillness, she was still Lena. Still the girl who'd shared her popsicle with a friend. Still innocent in her hope. As the clock struck midnight, she stood, her reflection in the window a blend of then and now, tired, bruised, but unbowed, and whispered, "For you, Daddy." The mystery of Marcus's gaze that day unraveled in her soul, not just pain, but trust, a quiet faith that she'd rise where he'd fallen. 3 weeks after the Gilded Fork, Lena's journey was a testament, crushed, yes, but never broken, her kindness a thread no one could snap. She'd turned her father's defeat into a mission, her mother's sacrifices into strength, every tear into a step toward justice. Derek was a footnote now, his career ashes, but Lena's fight stretched beyond him, to a system that preyed on the vulnerable. To a world she'd reshape one ruling at a time. Her innocence wasn't blind, it was deliberate. A choice to see good where others saw only rot. To offer mercy where she'd been denied it. She stepped to the window. The city's lights a constellation of hope. And felt the weight of those chants, #Justice for Lena, carrying her forward. "This isn't the end," she murmured, her voice soft but resolute. "It's the beginning, for all of us." Her fight against racism and corruption was her life's blood. A legacy of love no cruelty could bury. A beacon for anyone who'd ever been stepped on yet still stood. Lena's heart is a rare thing, kind, innocent, unbreakable, and her journey's far from over. She's fighting for Marcus, for Miles, for every soul this system's crushed. And she won't stop, hit, like, below to hope her kindness never fades. To pray her battle against racism and corruption burns on. Share your story, your hurt, your strength. Let's stand with her. Keep her light alive, and push this fight forward together. 3 weeks after the slap at the Gilded Fork had stripped Derek Holt of everything, his badge, his reputation, his sanity. The dim flicker of a street lamp seeped through the grimy blinds of his Queens apartment, casting jagged shadows across a room that reeked of desperation. Whiskey bottles littered the floor, their amber stains pooling like blood, while a bulletin board loomed on the wall, a chaotic shrine of vengeance. Newspaper clippings of Judge Lenora Jackson's rise, grainy photos of her leaving her brownstone, a scrawled timeline of her daily routine: 8 a.m. court, 1 p.m. lunch at a corner deli, 6:30 p.m. home with her son, Miles. Derek's bloodshot eyes darted across it, his unshaven face twitching with a manic energy as he muttered, "She took it all, she doesn't get to win." His life had crumbled into ash, suspended, vilified, abandoned, but the hatred festering in his gut had birthed a plan. One far darker than a smear campaign or a clumsy break-in. He wasn't just after Lena anymore, he wanted her soul shattered, her world razed, and he'd found the perfect weapon: Miles, her 14-year-old son. The soft spot she'd never shielded in time. A creak at the door snapped him from his trance, and in stepped Miller, a wiry figure cloaked in a black hoodie, his face half hidden by a baseball cap, his voice a low rasp like gravel underfoot. "You ready to end her, Holt?" Miller asked, tossing a burner phone onto the table, its screen glowing with a single text: "Target acquired, school's out at 3. Derek's lips curled into a sick grin, his fingers tightening around a knife he'd been sharpening for days. "She'll beg me to stop," he hissed, "and I won't." Miller was no stranger to shadows, an ex-con with a rap sheet scrubbed clean by favors from dirty cops. A ghost who thrived on chaos. He'd found Derek drowning his sorrows in a dive bar a week ago. Recognized the disgraced cop from the headlines. And saw an opportunity. "I've got grudges too," Miller had said, his eyes glinting with malice. "Jackson's put away half my crew. Let's make her bleed." Together, they'd hatched a plot that started small, anonymous blog posts accusing Lena of bribery. Doctored photos of her with shady figures, but it wasn't enough. The public rallied behind her. #Justice for Lena drowning out their lies. And Derek's rage boiled over. Now, their scheme had morphed into something monstrous. Miller had trailed Miles for days, snapping shots of the lanky kid with his sketchbook, mapping his walk home from school through a quiet alley off 145th Street. Derek's plan was simple yet horrifying: snatch Miles, hold him in a derelict warehouse by the docks, and force Lena to watch, via a live feed, as he carved her life apart. Piece by piece, she'll drop every case, resign, disappear, Derek snarled, pacing the room, or he's gone. Miller nodded, unfazed, slipping a roll of duct tape from his bag. I've got the van tinted. No plates. Tomorrow, 3:15, we move. The air thickened with their pact. A pact so vile it seemed to choke the room itself. Derek's desperation twisting into a fury that knew no bounds. The suspense tightened like a noose as Derek prepared, his every move dripping with infuriating audacity. He spent the night hunched over his laptop, hacking into Lena's court schedule with a stolen password Miller had procured. Tomorrow, she'd be tied up in a hearing until 5 p.m., oblivious until it was too late. He taped a photo of Miles to the board, the boy's innocent smile X'd out in red marker. A cruel taunt that fueled his delirium. You think you're untouchable, Judge? He spat, slashing the knife through the air as if slicing her pride. He packed a duffel, zip ties, a gag, a grainy camcorder to capture her collapse, each item a brick in the wall of his revenge. Miller returned at dawn, his van idling outside, its engine a low growl that rattled the windows. He handed Derek a ski mask, his voice cold. Kid's a talker, keep him quiet. Derek's laugh was unhinged, a sound that clawed at sanity. As he imagined Lena's face, her calm shattered, her pleas echoing through a grainy screen. He'd lost everything, his brother's legacy, his father's pride, the precinct's brotherhood, and now he'd strip her of more than a career. The plan was set. Miller would grab Miles in the alley. Derek would rig the warehouse with a live stream. And by dusk, Lena would be on her knees, begging a monster who'd never relent. The sheer gall of it, targeting a child despite a mother, was a slap to every shred of decency. A climax of cruelty that begged for retribution. Derek's mind was a storm of hatred as he climbed into the van. The knife tucked into his waistband, his pulse hammering with a sick thrill. The streets blurred past, Queens fading into Harlem's edges, each mile a step closer to the abyss. Miller drove in silence, his cap pulled low. But Derek couldn't stop talking. His voice a fevered rant. She's got the city kissing her feet, parades. Headlines, like she's some saint. I'll show him she's nothing. He clutched a crumpled article, Judge Jackson hailed as hero, and tore it to shreds. The pieces fluttering like ash. The alley loomed ahead, shadowed by sagging tenements, and Derek's breath hitched as he spotted Miles, earbuds in, sketching as he walked, oblivious to the predators circling. Miller slowed the van, the side door creaking open, and Derek's hand tightened on the knife. His plan a grotesque crescendo: grab the boy, vanish into the docks, and beam Lena's nightmare to the world. She'll never see it coming, he whispered, stepping out, the rain masking his footsteps as he crept closer. Miller's shadow at his flank. The suspense peaked, heartbeats loud, air electric, as Derek lunged, the world holding its breath for the fallout of his rage. This wasn't just revenge, it was annihilation. A plot so depraved it screamed for justice to strike back, leaving listeners seething at the edge of their seats. Derek's hatred had festered into a beast, and now it roared, claws bared, aimed at the heart of Lena's life. He'd lost it all: career, family, dignity, and in his twisted mind, she owed him her ruin. Miller's cold cunning made it real, but Derek's soul drove it to this extreme. A revenge that didn't just wound, it obliterated. The listener's anger climaxes here. At the brink of a child's peril, a mother's torment, a villain's unhinged gall, a fury begging for resolution. The clock in Judge Lenora Jackson's brownstone study struck 6:45 p.m. Its chime a hollow echo in a house that felt suffocatingly empty. 3 weeks after Derek Holt's slap at the Gilded Fork had upended her life, a new terror gripped her. Miles, her 14-year-old son, hadn't come home from school. His usual text, "Ma, I'm good," sketching in the park, never arrived. And the silence was a dagger twisting in her chest. She'd paced the hardwood floor, phone pressed to her ear, calling his friends, the school, the precinct, her voice steady but fraying as each, "haven't seen him," piled on dread. Then, at 7:02, her laptop pinged, a grainy video feed flickered to life, unprompted, and Lena's breath stopped. There was Miles, bound to a rusted chair in a shadowy warehouse, duct tape across his mouth, his wide eyes darting in panic as Derek Holt loomed behind him, a knife glinting in his hand. "Smile for mommy, kid," Derek sneered, his voice warped by rage and whiskey. before turning the blade to the camera. "You took my life. Judge, now I've got yours. Drop every case. Resign, or he's gone by midnight." The screen froze on Miles's tear-streaked face, and Lena's knees buckled, a primal scream tearing from her throat as she clutched the desk. Maternal love, a sacred, unbreakable force, flooded her, drowning fear with a resolve sharper than steel. She'd save him, even if it meant her last breath. Derek's revenge wasn't just a strike at her career, it was a violation of her soul. A mother's holiest bond, and she'd burn the world to bring Miles home. Derek's plot was a nightmare sculpted from spite, its details a gut punch of cruelty. Lena replayed the video, each frame searing her. Miles's wrists zip-tied raw, a bruise blooming on his cheek where Derek had struck him. The boy's sketchbook, his refuge, torn and scattered across the damp concrete. Derek's taunts looped in her mind. "You thought you'd bury me? Watch this." His unhinged grin a mask of a man who'd lost everything and now craved her annihilation. She recognized the warehouse's rusted beams from dockside cases she'd judged, abandoned. Lawless. A perfect tomb for his vengeance. He'd planned this with a shadowy accomplice, Miller, their footsteps echoing in the feed as they mocked her powerlessness. The clock ticked, 9 p.m., 3 hours to midnight. And Lena's heart thundered with a mother's terror and fury. She'd faced fabricated smears before, weathered his lies online, but this was beyond revenge. It was a declaration of war on her child. Her blood, her reason to live, every memory of Miles, his laugh over breakfast, his arms around her after a long day, ignited a fire no threat could douse. She grabbed her coat, a concealed revolver from her safe, a judge's last resort, and a photo of Marcus, her father, whispering, "Help me, Daddy." She'd find Miles herself. Damn the cost. Because a mother's love wasn't just sacred, it was a force that could defy death itself. Lena's search was a descent into hell, fueled by desperation and a love that transcended survival. She drove through Harlem's rain-slicked streets, the revolver cold against her hip, her mind a storm of strategy and prayer. The precinct had brushed her off. "We're looking, Judge," but no leads yet, their apathy a slap. So she took it alone. A mother against a monster. She started at Miles's school, interrogating a janitor who'd seen a black van idling near the alley at 3:15 p.m. His shaky, didn't think much of it, stoking her rage. She scoured the alley, finding a shred of Miles's sketchbook, a superhero in her likeness, muddy and torn. A silent cry that broke her heart anew. Each clue was a lifeline, a bodega camera catching the van's blurred tail, a dockworker's tip about a creepy guy lurking near Warehouse 17. By 10:30, she stood at the docks, the warehouse's hulking silhouette looming under a moonless sky, its silence deafening. She crept closer, rain masking her steps, and peered through a cracked window. Miles was there, alive, whimpering as Derek paced, knife in hand, Miller's shadow flickering near a laptop streaming her torment. Tears stung her eyes, but she swallowed them. Love demanded action, not collapse. She'd trade her life for his. Storm and guns blazing if she had to. Because no mother could stand by while her child suffered. The sacredness of that bond pulsed through her. A vow etched in every fiber. Miles would live, even if she didn't. Then, a revelation struck like lightning. Lena's search uncovered a thread tying Derek's revenge to a deeper rot. As she crouched outside, her father's photo slipped from her pocket, its edges worn from years of quiet reverence. Marcus's arrest in '92 flashed, those cops, their smug grins, the obstruction, lie, and a memory clicked. One had worn a rein. A serpent coiled around a badge, glinting as he'd cuffed her dad. She froze, eyes darting to Derek's hand in the video feed. There it was. The same rein, dull but unmistakable, a chilling echo across decades. Her mind raced. This wasn't just Derek, it was a network. An underground cabal of corrupt cops who'd silenced her father and countless others. Now using Derek as their blunt instrument to crush her too. She'd ruled on cases hinting at it, missing evidence, dead witnesses, but never connected it to Marcus until now. Miller's presence sealed it, a fixer. A shadow operative for a brotherhood that thrived on power and fear. Lena's breath hitched. They'd targeted Miles to stop her anti-corruption crusade. A legacy of vengeance stretching back to her father's bloodied knees. She gripped the revolver tighter. Her investigation now personal. She'd save Miles. Then dismantle this beast, exposing every name, every sin, even if it killed her. Maternal love wasn't just her shield, it was her sword, cutting through decades of lies. Lena stood at the warehouse's rusted door, heart pounding, ready to breach hell for her son. Derek's clock ticked, 11:15, and she knew she'd face him alone. A mother against a monster. Her life a small price for Miles's. The network's shadow loomed, but her love burned brighter. An unshakable force born from Marcus's sacrifice and her unbreakable will. She whispered, "I'm coming, baby," and stepped into the dark. Revolver raised. A judge-turned warrior whose kindness fueled her fury. The warehouse door creaked ajar under Judge Lenora Jackson's trembling hand, the rusted metal cold against her palm as rain lashed the docks, masking the thunder of her heartbeat. Inside, the air was thick with damp rot and menace. Shadows twisting across the concrete floor where her son, Miles, sat bound to a chair, his muffled cries piercing her soul like shards of glass. Derek Holt paced before him, knife slashing the air in erratic arcs, his bloodshot eyes wild with a hatred that had consumed him whole. While Miller, the shadowy fixer, hunched over a laptop, his fingers dancing across keys to stream Lena's impending collapse to an unseen audience. It was 11:20 p.m., 40 minutes to Derek's midnight deadline, and Lena clutched her revolver. Its weight a lifeline as she slipped inside, her soaked coat clinging to her frame. Maternal love surged through her, a sacred tide of terror and ferocity. She'd seen Miles's bruised face on that cursed feed, his sketchbook torn at his feet, and every fiber of her screamed to shield him, to tear through this evil with her bare hands if she must. 3 weeks since the gilded fork, Derek's slap had spiraled into this nightmare. But Lena's journey had forged her for this moment, a mother, a judge, a warrior against corruption, ready to trade her life for justice. She edged along the wall, her breath shallow, the suspense coiling tighter. Would Derek spot her? Could she reach Miles before the knife fell? The warehouse creaked, a distant siren wailed faintly, and Lena's heart leapt. Help? Or just the wind? Listeners would lean in, breathless, wondering, could love outrun evil? Or would this be her end? Lena's courage blazed as she crept closer, each step a testament to a mother's unbreakable will. Miles's whimpers cut deeper than any wound, his wide, tearful eyes locked on Derek, who ranted, "Your mom's a dead woman. Kid. She'll wish she'd let me be." And Lena's soul ached with a love so fierce it could have shattered stone. She remembered cradling him as a baby, his tiny hand in hers after Marcus's death, promising him a world she'd fix. Now, that promise drove her through this hell. She'd faced down corrupt cops in court, stared into the abyss of her father's unjust arrest. But this was her crucible. Derek and Miller weren't just men. They were the rot she'd sworn to destroy, a network tied to Marcus's bloodied knees decades ago. Her revolver trembled, but her resolve didn't. She'd end this. Not for revenge, but for Miles, for every child this system had crushed. Suddenly, Miller's head snapped up, his shadowed gaze sweeping the dark. Someone's here, and Derek spun, knife glinting as he lunged toward Miles. Lena's breath caught, time slowing to a razor's edge. Would she shoot? Could she save him? The thrill peaked as she stepped from the shadows, voice a low roar. "Drop it, Holt, or I will." Derek froze, Miller cursed, and the air crackled. Listeners' hearts would race, desperate for the next beat. Then, the warehouse erupted, glass shattered above as SWAT breached the skylight. Black-clad figures rappelling down with rifles trained, their shouts, "Hands up!" Now, a thunderclap that shattered Derek's delusions. Lena dove for Miles, shielding him as bullets whizzed past, her arms a fortress around his shaking form, whispering, "I've got you, baby, I've got you." Maternal love poured from her, tears mingling with his as she tore the tape from his mouth. His sobs, "Mom," a lifeline pulling her from despair. Derek lunged, knife slashing wildly, but a SWAT officer tackled him midair, pinning him to the concrete with a knee to his spine, cuffs snapping shut as he screamed. "This ain't over." Miller bolted, laptop abandoned, but a second team cut him off at the exit, his cap tumbling as he hit the ground, face first, blood trickling from a split lip. The suspense dissolved into chaos, flashlights swept the room. Miles clung to Lena, and she held him tighter. Her courage a beacon that had summoned this rescue. She'd tripped an alarm on her phone before entering. A judge's foresight saving her son. But it was her heart, raw, relentless, that had carried her here. Listeners would feel the rush, the relief, and the lingering question. What did this victory cost her? Derek and Miller's end was no grand spectacle, but a gritty, worthy unraveling, realistic in its banality, satisfying in its justice. Hauled from the warehouse in cuffs. Derek's defiance crumbled as cameras flashed outside, the city's eyes searing his fall. The next day, precinct logs spilled open, his 5 prior complaints. Miller's scrubbed record as a fixer for a corrupt cop ring tied to Marcus's arrest, and the evidence stacked high: kidnapping, assault, conspiracy. At trial, Derek sat hollow-eyed, his lawyer's pleas drowned by Miles's testimony. The boy's shaky voice, "He hit me," said Mom was next, sealing his fate. Convicted on all counts, he got 25 years. No parole, his name erased from the force. His cell a gray box where his screams echoed unheard. Miller, colder, cut a deal, 15 years for names. Exposing a dozen officers in the network Lena's father had crossed. Their end wasn't cinematic, it was a slow grind. Derek a forgotten thug. Miller a snitch despised by his own, yet it fit. A quiet justice for their chaos. Lena watched from the gallery. Miles's hand in hers, her tears not for them but for the years stolen from Marcus. From her son, her courage had destroyed evil. Reclaimed justice. And listeners would nod. Villains don't always burn, sometimes. They just fade. Lena's journey was a mother's odyssey. Her love a sacred flame that lit the dark. She'd faced Derek's knife, Miller's shadows, a legacy of corruption, and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken, holding Miles outside the courthouse. She whispered, "You're my world," her voice cracking with the weight of nearly losing him. Her bravery a gift to every soul this system had wronged. She'd uncovered the network, linked it to Marcus's pain, and vowed to dismantle it, case by case, life by life. Her gavel now a sword tempered by love. The city cheered, but her victory was quieter. Miles's smile, safe at last. Listeners would feel her heart, raw, radiant, wondering, what's next for this warrior mother? Will her fight reshape the world? This isn't the end, it's a beginning. A testament to maternal love and courage against evil. If you think Derek and Miller's fate is completely worthy, if Lena's journey stirs you, hit like below. Share your tears, your hopes. Let's cheer her on as she battles racism and corruption. A mother's heart leading the charge. What do you think happens next? The sun broke through the gray shroud over Manhattan, casting golden rays across the steps of City Hall, where Judge Lenora Jackson stood 3 months after the warehouse nightmare. Her son Miles by her side, his arm looped through hers like a lifeline. The crowd before her stretched beyond the plaza, thousands strong. A sea of faces from Harlem to the Bronx. Their chants of justice for Lena, justice for all, echoing off the marble facade like a heartbeat reborn. Derek Holt's slap at the Gilded Fork had sparked this fire. His kidnapping of Miles fanning it into a blaze. But Lena's victory, his arrest, Miller's betrayal, the exposure of their corrupt network, had turned her into more than a survivor. She was a symbol now. A beacon of hope rising from the ashes of systemic rot. Her torn blazer swapped for a navy suit that shimmered with quiet defiance. Tears welled as she gripped the podium. Her voice steady yet thick with emotion. This isn't about me, it's about us. About every mother who's fought. Every kid who's dreamed. Every soul this system tried to crush. We're not done. Miles squeezed her hand. His bruised cheek healed but his eyes alight with pride. And Lena's heart swelled. Maternal love had carried her through hell. But it was the people's roar that lifted her now. She'd dismantled a piece of the beast that stole her father Marcus. Convicted Derek on kidnapping and assault. Sent Miller to rot for spilling names. And yet her fight stretched further. A movement swelling against the larger corrupt machine. Listeners would feel the goosebumps. Here was a woman who'd turned pain into power. A real-life hero proving that even the broken can rebuild. The emotional tide crested as Lena scanned the crowd. Seeing echoes of her past in their faces, grandmothers clutching photos of lost sons. Teens waving signs scrawled with, "Hope lives here." A retired cop nodding solemnly. His badge long retired but his guilt laid bare. She thought of Marcus's laugh, silenced by cuffs in '92, and Miles's sketches, nearly lost to Derek's knife, and her throat tightened with a love so fierce it could have moved mountains. "I stood in that warehouse," she said, her voice trembling, "ready to trade my life for my boy. Because that's what we do, we hold on. We fight. We rise." The crowd erupted, a wave of cheers washing over her. And Miles whispered, "You're my superhero, Ma," his grin cracking her open with joy. Then, the humor slipped in, a spark to lighten the weight. She chuckled, wiping a tear. "And let me tell you, if Derek thought he could outsmart a mom with a law degree and a kid who draws better than he ever policed, he picked the wrong family." Laughter rippled through the plaza, a release as sweet as the breeze. And Lena flashed a wry smile. "He's probably sulking in his cell right now, wondering why his big revenge plan didn't come with a manual. How to Lose Everything 101. The crowd howled, Miles giggling beside her, and the moment landed. Triumph didn't need gloom, it could dance with joy. A good note to end on after the storm. The broader impact unfurled like a banner across the city. Lena's victory a spark igniting change. Within weeks, protests morphed into action, council hearings grilled precinct chiefs. Whistleblowers spilled decades of dirt. And a reform bill, dubbed Lena's Law, gained traction, mandating body cams and civilian oversight. She'd uncovered a network tied to Marcus's arrest. A cabal of cops who'd thrived on silence. And though Derek and Miller were just cogs, Derek jailed for 25 years. Miller snitching his way to 15, their fall cracked the machine open. Lena became a symbol not by choice but by necessity. Her face on murals in Harlem. Her name a chant at rallies nationwide. She met with mothers who'd buried sons to brutality, their tears staining her suit as she promised, "We'll keep going," her kindness a thread weaving them into her fight. The moral shone clear. Personal triumph over adversity, hers. Marcus's, Miles's, could ripple outward, toppling unchecked power if you dared to stand. In real life, it's the same, those everyday battles. Whether against a bully boss or a broken system, matter. Lena's story whispered to listeners, "You're not small, your voice can shake giants." She ended her speech with a nod to the crowd. "We're the reform, each of you. Every day," and the plaza thundered. A testament to hope's stubborn bloom. The humor returned to seal the win. A wink at life's absurdity. Lena stepped back, Miles tugging her sleeve, and quipped, "Guess I owe you a new sketchbook." "Huh? Derek's not exactly an art critic." He laughed. "Yeah, Ma, his stick figures would have gotten him life." The crowd ate it up, their joy a bomb, and Lena hugged him tight. Her heart full, evil lost. Justice won, and love endured. The movement grew, a tapestry of voices, students, workers, even cops who'd seen enough. Each thread a lesson. Systemic critique isn't abstract, it's personal. And change starts when you refuse to bow. For listeners, it's a mirror. Reflect on your fights. Big or small, they're not useless. Lena's life proved it. One woman, crushed yet unyielding, could shift a city, maybe a world. As confetti rained down, kids tossing it from the steps, she grinned. "Let's keep this party going, folks." No corrupt cops crashing it this time. The laughter was a promise. Hope could laugh. And that was power. This story's moral hits home. Triumph over adversity isn't just surviving, it's thriving. Lifting others as you rise. Lena's not a myth, she's as flawed, fierce, funny, showing that systemic injustice bends when we push together. In real life, think about it. That time you stood up, spoke out, helped someone, it ripples. Draw that lesson close. Courage and kindness can rewrite the rules. If this ending feels right, Derek down. Lena soaring, hope cracking through. Hit like below. Drop a comment. Your struggles, your wins, your laughs. Let's build this movement with her. Subscribe too. Stick with this channel for the earliest stories. Because trust me, we've got more heroes like Lena coming. And you won't want to miss a single punchline or punch thrown. What's your takeaway? Let's hear it.